This is AdviserGo, sort of the core piece of the platform that, if you will, that we're going to be talking and walking through. This is our advisor application that's used in multiple jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Ireland. We have international users, some in places like Malaysia, Singapore. They use different versions. This is one version. This is actually the UK version that we're looking at right now, where Voyant is actually the market leaders in the UK with some, I can't even remember, 1,800 plus firms of various sizes, from small 1-2 man shops to 50 and 70 man wealth management firms to large banking organizations. You'll get the sense right away, it's an interesting and visual solution. It's meant to be interactive and collaborative. Our goal here is to be visual. Our goal here is to be interactive. It's to present in a different way. Not just to talk about percentages, but really to engage the client in a whole different type of discussion focused on their goals, personalization, but with the depth associated with all of that we want to actually talk about. One of the things we've done at Voyant is, in this case, the UK version. Every single version that's in the system, if you will, has their own special things that are built into it. So you can see this case, we're using the sterling. You can see that we have the different products in the system. In this case, we have a stock market ISA. We have a lifetime ISA, onshore and offshore bonds. All of the things and types of products in those markets we have. And then we customize the solution to include proper taxation in terms of how it's going to be taxed, indicative of the date that the plan was actually created. We have contribution limits, withdrawal limits. We do the complex math. So in each of our jurisdictions that we go into, we really get into the weeds in most cases, if you will, to come to a point and says, okay, here's what we're really trying to do, here's what we're going to talk about. So this is base Voyant. This is our base solution that we look at. You'll notice that there's no real customization here. There's nothing really that we're doing that's going on. I could switch to a version here that's a bit more customized to give you a better sense of. This is actually the version that we built for Toronto Dominion. And this is now, we've actually switched, and this is in the Canadian jurisdiction. So you'll notice as we scroll down, if I open up the dashboard, that we're using different things. So we might have things like CPP, QPP. So that is the US's form, if we call it the United States. That's the US Social Security system. In Great Britain, this would actually be considered a state pension. We have those types of things in every market. But you can see in this version, again, it's the same core that we're built, same actual deployment that we're building everything on. Everything moves together. When we build something for one system, it's available to the other systems. But you'll notice one of the things about Voyant, it's meant to be visual and interactive. In a lot of cases, our clients will actually present their clients this solution the way that we're looking at it. During the pandemic, we've had great success with clients who've realized, you know, I can use WebEx, Teams, Zoom, whatever it might be, to present things to my client interactive using the screen and then mail the report. Yes, we do paper reports, but paper is something that's really more for the enterprise and organization as the consumer. The consumer wants to be wowed. They want to be interactive. We want to have a discussion. The plan that you're looking at right now, one of the cores to this plan, or all of our plans that I like to talk about, really depends on who the client is and what they want to talk about. One of the biggest pieces we're going to talk about in Voyant is timeline. And timeline really consists of multiple things. And really how you use these things depends on the client that you're working with and the market that you're working in. In this plan that I'm looking at right now, it's actually a high net worth plan with some very complex items in it. So here the client isn't really talking about goals as much as they're really talking about, yeah, we know we can do everything. We want to talk about events. So this plan has things put in events. And these are these visual icons that have been put into the system. So we have things like people going to college/university. We have graduations. We have retirement in the system, and then we have a future retirement release as well. We have all sorts of items that we can talk about inside the system and play with. And you name it, if I want to talk about adding goals to the system or an event to the system, we can add just about any type of a goal. And then use it to talk about that in the system to say, how are we doing toward this goal? How are we getting toward the goal? How are we looking? And really, these are solutions that's up to the advisor in most cases, how they want to use the system and talk about it, depending on the client that they're working with. But these visualizations, these little icons that are down here that we're going to talk about, you'll notice that they're everywhere. So here in the dashboard, they exist down here. When we go to the bigger version, we start talking about Let's See and go to the full screen version, or that we're going to talk about the plan in general. We can talk about these different items and play in these different items. And this is what we're going to talk about. We want to see time in relation to money. And this is a cash flow chart that I'm looking at right now. We could just as easily talk about an asset chart. We could just as easily talk about expenses and how they're spending money and how they're going to spend money over time. We can talk about debts and debt management. We can talk about net worth and growing the net worth. We can talk about taxes and tax efficiency. And then we're back to our friend cash flow. Now, I did all these, but I didn't even get into the details. So we can talk about each of these plans in terms of details and the specific products that are underlying and what's making up the cash flow. We can do that for any type of chart in the system and any market we're in. We can drill down and look at the different pieces that are here and have this type of depth and discussion that we want to. If we want to stay high level and talk about big picture, we certainly can, but we can really get down into the depth and the weeds. But it's really depending on how the advisor and client want to interact together and what it is that they actually want to do. And really that's the key of what we're doing here in Voyant. We're actually developing this picture that we're looking at. And one of the pieces that does is that allows us, one, through the timeline and goals to be personal. It allows us to be relatable. And we're going to talk about that in some of the other products that I'm going to work in just a little bit. But here our goal is to tell you what people will do is it's quite simple. Either through an integration or by hitting this little plus button and bringing data over from the system direct for things that maybe aren't through an integration. And we'll talk about integrations later. Here what we want to talk about is we can add any type of thing to the plan, and as I was showing earlier, have depth to those things in the plan. You name it, we can talk about it. Now one of the beauties of Voyant is, and I'll talk about the hierarchy and the ability to configure the solution in different ways. Certainly it's easy for us to white label the solution and give it different branding. We currently manage branding for almost every firm that we have. We manage some 1,200 different brands, and it's a very easy thing to do for each firm to have their own brand, market assumption, things of the sort. Yes, it gets more complex with the enterprises in some cases where we have multiple brands, which we can do as well. We also have the ability to turn on and off different sections with a click of a button. So two advisors in the same firm may see different things based on what they actually do. So if I'm not allowed to see insurance because I'm not allowed to sell insurance, maybe insurance disappears and I can't touch the insurance parts. I could see it in the plan, but I can't edit or do with it. But someone else who has insurance or the ability to deal with insurance might actually see it in their version of the solution. But really, as we add these things in, and each item we add in is down here in the dashboard. All of these pieces make up this picture of what we're looking at. And then, using a couple of different things. One, the advisor can walk through here and look at what's going on in this plan and get a sense for what it is they might need to do, what it is they're looking for and might need to fix in the plan. Two, we have the ability to use AI to read some of these plans, depending on what the enterprise wants to do, to say, maybe I can provide you some hints as to what's going on in this plan. Now that's up to an enterprise by enterprise basis that we work with, because really it's dependent on what market you're working in. And then in a lot of cases, it can be quite interesting that it's really up to that advisor who has that personal relationship with the client to make that determination of what's important and what we're looking at. What happens in solutions is we collect the data and we review the data like we've done now. We went over to Let's See, and we walked through these different pieces, and we can look at the different items. As I was saying, it's powerfully visual. We can compare these two plans together and have a different discussion of multiple plans working at the same time. I shouldn't have compared actually at this point, but that's okay. We could have dual charted and looked at two different charts as once as well. I'll talk a bit about comparing in just a second. So if I wanted to look at cash flow in relation to assets, I can look at cash flow in relation to assets, and we can see that for some reason we've got cash flow problems, but interestingly enough, we've got a tremendous amount of assets in the system. Well, that tells us we have a liquidity problem. So something's going to liquid whitus in this plan that's causing us issues. But really, we leave it to the advisor to sort of make that decision as to what's important and what's going to happen. And they can look at this and come up with detailed information as to what they want to deal with. Now, this plan is actually quite interesting because it's quite complex, and it gives you a sense of the depth that Voyant can go into. Here, you'll notice in this plan, not only do we have simple things like a defined benefit pension and CPP and QPP that you might see in a standard retirement plan. But it's quite interesting that we can see in this plan that we actually do have a holding corporation that's built in as well. And we can see that there's items that are actually owned by the holding corporation. So you actually have things like a trust investment account that's actually owned by the holding corporation. Here's our holdco right here. It's a container, is a corporate container that we can talk about. So it gives us this ability and the flexibility to do very complex things inside the plan, the way people normally would do them in real life. And this plan is quite interesting, and Canada is quite interesting in general when we talk about what we're doing. But this has a holdco in it that's quite common in the Canadian market, where the holdco is actually receiving, if you will, the profits from a business that's been run that's getting put in the holdco that can be distributed to the individuals later on. And what we're doing in this plan is looking at that. Now, that can create some very interesting tax problems in a plan as well. So this is where we start getting into the depth. And it's one of those pieces, as I was looking at that tax chart earlier, what an advisor will do is look at this and say, well, wait, look at this. This is interesting. This has some massive tax spikes into the system. Yes, this is because this plan has been set up wrong, if you will, in terms of how they currently designed. They didn't realize the rules in the system, and that every 21 years in Canada, trusts are liquidated and the tax must be paid out if they're not set up correctly. So in this case, that's what's actually happened in the plan, that we have a problem with this trust in terms of this discussion. Now, again, I could have easily started focusing on our cash flow problem before, but this plan actually has a much bigger issue. And what we do then as a client, what an advisor can then do, is looking at the first thing, they can then start working through a series of what-if plans. Really, they can take anything inside the plan, and then we can change it and then compare it back to the plan before. We even have a very sophisticated system that allows us to cascade data through. So if you've built 5, 6, 7, 10 different plans with 10 different scenario ideas in it, and the client forgot to tell you something at the beginning, if you add it to the original plan, the base plan as we call it, it will cascade through the children plans as long as that same piece of data hasn't been changed anywhere else. So you can get this visual picture that's going on that we can then use for compare purposes, as I was comparing plans earlier. That's really what this allows us to do. It allows us to go in and then create any number of what-if plans in the system, as I've done over here, to talk about different things that might actually happen in the plan. The first one we did was what's called fix the estate freeze, and that's what took care of that first issue inside the system. So if I go to that plan now and review it, we'll look at that plan and go to the tax chart and get a good sense of what's actually happening inside of it. So here I can go back and say, no, look, let's look at the taxes here. And actually, I tell you what, let's do this. Let's actually compare two plans. Here was our original plan on the bottom, our fixed estate freeze plan at the top. And what we're going to see when this calculates and it comes up is that we no longer have these massive spikes anymore. We went from paying $9 million in the original base plan on the bottom to $116,000 at the top, and we've really smoothed out our taxes. Now what that's done actually now is it's actually created, and I'll just go this way and go to our asset chart, a very interesting scenario that if we look here in the future, we went from in the bottom plan having 15 million in assets to 71 million if we fix the estate freeze correctly. So we get the sense for some of these big things that are happening and how what someone doesn't realize, or if something's been set up wrong, how they can have massive, massive problems in the future. And that's what Voyant's about, visualizing them and fixing them. Now you'll notice, if you remember from our list up here, there were lots of things that we actually talked about. So we've built what-if plans to talk through each of these different things and have a discussion with the client, what they're interested in. Some of them might be buying and selling vacation homes, cottages in Canada, if you will, investing the dividends from the holdco a different way. Some of them are then very interesting strategies. For example, the final strategy in this plan that was built through by the advisor. And you'll notice we still haven't taken care of that cash flow issue because, again, it's, if you will, 30 plus years in the future. We're not necessarily worried about it right now. And that's up to the advisor to decide when they want to fix these things. But this plan is very interesting, and what it's done is that we've actually in this plan for, if you will, tax efficiency purposes in the future and for estate transition, we've gone out right now and said, look, one of the best things you could think about doing was putting in a whole life policy and putting insurance into the system. And here you'll see we've actually added a whole life policy into the system to give you a sense of how it's used. Actually, in this case, this is actually illustration from a life insurance company that was imported in, so it was directly imported system in terms of the whole life policy. If we have an integration directly with the product manufacturer, we can put the actual products into the system as well and do it in this manner. So here we've got the policy that we built into the system. What this actually is able to allow us to do is a huge amount of transition of wealth, so that the wealth can go into this funded life insurance policy and transfer to heirs while avoiding the estate, and then other items might still live in the estate and go from there, but we can see in this plan where our net worth is right now and where we're growing to. The final piece is that then we can then start looking at that legacy, and we could do this along the way, but get a sense of legacy and where this plan lives. So we can see Max at the projected age 90 inside the plan. Now, in any case, I could have played and said, retire earlier or later. I can play with mortality. You name any type of what if, we can play with in Voyant. Any item in the system, we can actually use and say, okay, well, what if this happens, and play with it. So when Max passes away with $64 million in wealth, you'll see he pays nothing in taxes. Everything's in corporate holdings. It transitions down to his wife smoothly in terms of these different matters that go from there. And all the elements are up. When she passes at age 90, the estate and everything that she owned in the estate is going to have some pretty serious taxes on it in terms of $33 million. We'll see the taxes coming out of the holdco. We'll see the taxes coming out of the estate. And here at the bottom, we can see from the estate transfer, what's been transferred out from the estate. Now the life policy is separate. And we can talk about the different pieces that have gone through. And so we'll see what's been paid out in taxes. So here's our total taxes. Here's the total distributions that were paid out in terms of what paid out from the estate. So it gives you a sense of the depth that we can go into. Now, not all plans have to go into it. Quite a few advisors do not have access to these different things in terms of some of these different pieces. We turn them off. Maybe they're not supposed to do certain things like talk about estates or talk about insurance, but the ones they do, we can talk about it. So lots of pieces we can get into in terms of the depth that's here. As I was showing before, just like we were talking about with different pieces, we have all of the different types of things in the system, and each of these types of accounts as well, we can talk about all sorts of depth in here. We can talk about, and this one may not be set up with it, what holdings are in it, how they're investing the portfolio, and all this is customizable, whether it's a risk level and the different pieces there are. All those details. We can talk about specific products that might go into the system. Everything you can think gets built up into this picture. All of that depth of math. Everything here can then be, in this case, customized to the enterprise standards. And there's a number of features that you'll see in other videos. It's like, wow, okay, there's a lot of depth we've gone into that are specific to enterprises. But every step of the way, the idea is it's meant to be visual, collaborative, enterprise in terms of everything we've done in terms of configuration and customization. Yes, as we showed before, we can just as easily stay over here in the base version, which a lot of our firms use the base version, especially the smalls and mids, and it's our UI. They can configure to their UI. But all along the way, the whole model is meant to be, let's interact with the client in new ways. Let's have a conversation. What's important to them? If it's just a simple goal of maintaining a lifestyle for a period of time, and that's what we're getting started with, and then it builds to something bigger in terms of a large number of different types of what-if plans, whatever it might be. That's sort of the core of what happens with Voyant Advisor in all of our jurisdictions that really sort of makes up what it is that we're trying to do and why we've been successful.